Hello, Garland Nixon here, and the Trump people have set up some kind of a meeting in Alaska. We're going to talk about that a little bit, and there are indications that the neocon lunatics are prepping, Trump included, are prepping for a war in the Americas. Venezuela seems to be in the crosshairs, and maybe more. Let's talk. Hello, hold on a second here. Sorry, I'm out of my current home studio, so I'm on the road. So certainly will be. Let's see, make sure audio's good. It appears that audio's good. It appears that everything's good. Everybody, just make sure. Let me know if you have any. When I'm out of the studio or what have you. Oftentimes I'm in the bunker at a remote location. Awful sunny for a bunker, but you know how these bunkers are. Let me see. Allow. Um, but at any rate, so let's get going. Audio, video is clear. Thank you very much. Certainly appreciate the feedback and the help from everybody in the chat. Let's go. We'll start with the Russia U.S. Meeting in Alaska. A couple of things. Let's start here. Why Alaska? Why Alaska? One may ask. Here's what I think. It's remote. It's safe. Certainly, Putin, the Russians were not going to meet anywhere in the EU. There was talk about the Vatican or whatever, nowhere near the European Union because they don't trust them. And they know, for all they know, they may try some kind of a violent attack. They may try some kind of um, a terrorist attack. Certainly everything would be bugged, as everything always is bugged, but MI6, etc., would be all over it. So I think the Russians feel like this. Okay, Alaska, which I don't know how much you know about Alaska, but it's like a third the size of the rest of the 48 contingent states, and it has 300,000 people basically. So it is basically a vast empty land, and it's safer. It's kind of like you're going to meet a spy somewhere. I guess a spy, whatever. You're going to meet somebody somewhere, right? And you say, where do you want to meet? Let's meet somewhere where people can't bug us, people can't attack us, where we can look around, right? Where I can see everything way far around me. So I think it is it's close to Russia. There is some history. Was formerly part of Russia. You may remember the old discussion about years ago about a peace bridge where the 25-mile. When people ask you this, what's the closest distance between Russia and the United States? 25 miles. That's the distance in our border in the Aleutian Islands. And there was once a discussion about building a bridge across 25-mile bridge, and that was going to be called the Peace Bridge. So the bottom line is this: there is history and there is symbolism available for Alaska. Additionally, there is, I think, some issues of safety, and of course, let's not forget what is the discussion also now. It is uh, Putin goes to the U.S. and then Trump comes to Russia, right? So the bottom line is this. I think that for the Russians wanting to do that, their best option was as close as possible as they could be to home, out in the middle of nowhere. Who knows? You never know what's going to happen in life, but let's see what happens and go from there. I also think that there are a lot of people who, there's great weeping and gnashing of teeth. It actually, I find it interesting, and that is, one thing I will never do. I will never say to myself, I think I'm smarter than Putin and Lavrov. Not based on what I've seen. Based on what I've seen, they have been chess players extraordinaire so far. So For those who think that suddenly Putin and Lavrov and the Russian team have dropped their IQ by 50 million and oh, they're just puppets and whatever, Trump will come in and offer them an old bumper from a 57 Buick and they'll take the deal and walk away and be had again. I don't believe that. I don't believe that they have been so consistent saying, look, here's what you got to do. This, and this. From the very beginning, that has never changed. And the idea that after absolute consistent from the very beginning, what did they say? The root causes. What did they say 2 weeks ago? The root causes. What did they say 2 months ago? What did they say 2 years ago? The root causes. And they give a list of the root causes. Now, the safest bet is always consistency. They gave a list of the root causes before the conflict started. Putin gave a speech on the root causes right after the conflict started. And consistently from the day the conflict started till now, they've been consistent about the root causes. And people are like, well, I think they're going to abandon the root causes and just take whatever. It's not logical and it's not consistent. Okay. Now, let me go back to this. So the other thing the Russians have said is there's an acceptable deal. And here's what I have to say. Of course, acceptable is you've heard me say this, that's an American word. This is a translation from a Russian word. The closest they can find is acceptable. So don't think that acceptable necessarily, whatever word they use in Russian means the same thing. Here's what I think. I think that there is not acceptable from the perspective of, here's a final deal, let's take it. This is the way people are interpreting it. Acceptable. Oh my God, the deal's done and they're going to sign it. I'm going to say that ain't true, or it is true. Here's what I'm saying. The Russians know what they're dealing with. They've already said there will be no Minsk 3. They watched what the U.S. did with Iran. They know what time it is. How about this? What if the North Koreans said? The North Koreans said, we won't deal with the Americans. When Trump was like, he sent a letter to Kim Jong-un and said, hey, we want to talk. They ignored the letter. They said, we're not answering the letter. We're not talking to these people. We know who they are. It would be absurd for us to try to strike a deal with these people, right? So my point is, you think the North Koreans know it, and the Iranians know it, and the Chinese know it, and the Russians don't know it? As brilliant as they have been at handling this issue so far, I'm supposed to believe they suddenly became stupid and they just said, well, we'll just give everything up and we'll allow them to rebuild Ukraine and attack us again. You got to be. I think that's emotional. I think that is emotional. I think there are people who are afraid. They're manifesting their fears. Oh, no, they're going to take it. I don't know what to do. And they're winning on the battlefield. And that is creating a certain level of desperation amongst the Trump's people. So the bottom line is, I think that Trump has made some kind of an offer, not an offer, not some final offer. And here's what I think it probably is. One of the major hurdles, or the major hurdle, has been this. They're talking two different languages, wherein the Trump people are talking the Kellogg language, right? The Trump people are like, yes, let's talk about a land swap, and let's talk about we've got to force the Russians to do this. Let's talk about whatever, right? Let's talk about Putin wants to expand something, all this foolishness that has nothing to do with the Russians actually want. Saying you want, it's been a straw man argument, wherein the Russians say, we want to deal with the root causes. And the U.S. says, we'll make you an offer that has nothing to do with the root causes. And the Russians say, we want to talk about the root causes. Okay, well, how about this offer that has nothing to do with the root causes? And the Russians say, no, we want to talk about NATO expansion. I got an idea. Let's talk about something else that has nothing to do with the root causes. And that's been it. The Russians have said, we've got to talk about NATO expansion. And the neocons can't talk about NATO expansion. So they have to say, we're offering the Russians all kinds of things. That's like a guy's girlfriend or wife says, you know what I want is candy. And he says, here's some flowers. And she says, but what I want is candy. Oh, here's a piece of jewelry. I want candy. Okay, well, how about I get you a new mop? And she said, you know what I'm saying? Anything but what you want. And she just holds to it and says, no, sorry, it's candy or nothing. I ain't taking that. Oh, fair enough. Okay, you got me. I'll tell you what. I'll buy you a new computer. Candy. That's what it is. It is continually trying to offer. Let's go back to this. Mercouris and a lot of other people have said this for a while, and that is what the West does is negotiate with itself, right? Instead of negotiate with the Russians, here's what they say. What can we give the Russians that will suit our agenda and allow us to kind of get out of this thing for a while and then attack the Russians later, right? Let's meet with France and Germany. France and Germany, let's come up with something to offer the Russians. Shouldn't we ask the Russians? No, because they'll tell us what they want, and we can't give them that. So they all get together and they come up with a plan and they say, we're going to offer the Russians this. And the Russians say, we already told you we won't take it. Hold on, wait a minute. Here's a formal notification. We're offering you this. And the Russians said, what are you giving us for? We told you that ain't what we want. And then the idea is to go, oh, the Russians won't take it. They don't want peace. They won't take the deal that we came up with amongst ourselves that we already knew they wouldn't take, that they told us they wouldn't take. Oh, imagine that. So it has been the West negotiating with itself, not saying what is it the Russians want. It is saying, what can we give them that will allow us to continue on this quest for hegemony? What will we give them that will allow us to continue to go after the Russians, allow us to continue on our agenda and get the Russians off our back, but for God's sake, we're losing the war. The Russians are like, well, we're not going to take it. And oh, by the way, we're winning the war, so we don't have to. Okay. So here's what I believe happened for the Russians to say this is acceptable. They've always said, look, and it's consistent. The Russians have always said, we are always open to negotiations. That is a Russian way of doing things. It's a history. And let's face it, wars, people do negotiate during wars, right? So the Russians have always said, hey, we'll negotiate at any time. We just need to talk about the root causes. What I suspect the Russians saying it's acceptable, meaning acceptable to talk about, is this, that there was a discussion about the root causes. That somehow, somewhere in there, that Witkoff was authorized, as Trump's deputy, shall we say, Witkoff was authorized to say to the Russians, we'd like to meet with you and we'll talk about the did you ever see I remember the old reruns of Happy Days, right? And Fonzie was the cool guy. And what Fonzie could never say was I was wrong. And so one time Richie tried to get him to say I was wrong and he couldn't get it. He was like, you've got to say it. You can do it, Fonzie. And Fonzie was like, I was right. He's the super cool guy. He could never say he's wrong. And that's probably where Witkoff was. Hey, we told you we're going to talk about the root causes, Witkoff. What do you have to say? We'll talk about the... What was that? Can't hear you, buddy. A little louder, a little clearer. Can't hear you. You can do it. Root causes. And Witkoff's just like, okay, I'll write it down. Here, I'll pass you this. Nope, you got to say it. Talk about the root causes. I suspect, and this is all speculation, I suspect that there was what's the word I want to talk about? An agreement to at least begin talking about the root causes. Remember, Putin said, I ain't going to meet with Trump. I would imagine this. Now, you never know what happened on the inside. Because remember, this is an opening. Somebody just put, there will be no peace from the Alaska meeting watch. Of course not. Understand the Russians. The Russians are very, very bureaucratic people. We got to meet. Lavrov's got to meet. Details have to be written out. This has to happen. Somebody has to. This is a 6-month program thing with them. It takes forever for them to do anything. So the idea that there's peace from that, I don't think that's going to happen. At any rate, I don't think that's a reasonable expectation. But at any rate, here's what I believe happened, and it makes sense. It's consistent with Russian diplomacy. Witkoff has been back and forth to Moscow for a while. And they've been trying to get a meeting with Trump for a while. Well, meet with Putin. Putin, we ain't ready for that. Okay, how about a meeting with Putin? Nah, not yet. Okay, meeting with Putin? No. Here's what I suspect happened, and it makes sense. I mean, logically speaking, think of this. If you come to me, I want a meeting with you, Garland, and I say no. But what else am I going to say? I'm going to say, tell you what, you want a meeting with me? If you want a meeting with me, You got to agree to do this. This is the threshold for a meeting with me. If you want a meeting with me, you got to go here. No, if you can't go here, you can't get a meeting with me. And Trump has wanted a meeting with Putin for a long time for a number of reasons, not the least of which being his ego. I'm meeting with man Putin. I think Trump looks up to Vladimir Putin for a number of reasons, to be frank. I think he does, because Putin's very successful, very powerful, and the people in Russia love him. And he's everything that Trump wants to be, except he's competent. Trump, well, that's a whole other story. At any rate, so here's my point. I would imagine, and this is logical and makes sense and consistent with the Russians' way of doing things and thinking, that when, and think about this, this is what I would do. When Witkoff came and said Trump wants a meeting with Vladimir Putin, that something was set out. Okay, if you want a meeting with President Putin, this is what we need. If you want a meeting, that some standard was set for something. Look, man, you want a meeting with Putin and Trump? We're ready to do that. We will do it. However, this is the minimum. Okay, this is it. You got to do this. You got to go here. You go here, you get a meeting. That Trump and it's consistent if you understand Russian culture, right? That to say, in order to get a meeting, this is the minimum. You have to agree. He'll have a meeting, but you got to talk about that meeting. Has to be a discussion, include a significant discussion about the root causes. We want to talk about the root causes. We want to talk about NATO expansion. Well, the President Putin's ready to have a meeting with you, but it has to talk about NATO expansion. Now, could be wrong that that's what it's out. That's what I suspect it's about. The bottom line is this. I will guarantee you, as long as Trump's been asking for a meeting, that the Russians gave him the criteria. President Putin will meet you if you meet this standard right here. If you do X, and what is it they really want to talk about? The root causes. So guaranteed this. They're going to talk about the root causes. Now, I'm saying it's going to do any good. Trump, the neocons, whatever. Trump's got internal war on his own, and he's doing horrible things all over the world. But my point being, I think this meeting, there will be some discussion of the root causes, which is really bad news for the Europeans for this reason. And let me add this. It's beneficial to Trump because he wants out. He wants out. We can talk about everything else but Trump. Why he wants out could be evil and all that, but he wants out. That's the truth. Because the Europeans have to maintain the fiction of their narrative, that this has nothing to do with the root causes, that this is not about NATO expansion, that you can't even talk about NATO expansion, right? That that this is about one man, Vladimir Putin. He's just a crazy person, and he woke up one day and decided to attack Ukraine because, I don't know, he was out of Novichok and he needed to get more Novichok, and Novichok is grown in the fields of Ukraine, something absurd, whatever. But it had to be Putin's a bad guy. The Russians are evil, and they just attacked Ukraine out of the blue for no apparent reason. How evil are they? And when they get finished with Ukraine, they're going to attack all of us. So that's the fiction they have to maintain in order to gaslight their people, in order to continue saying, hey, we must go to war with Russia. Of course, you're all going to be nuked within the first hour, but that's not important. What's important is we, and by we mean you poor suckers that are being deindustrialized. We're going to the bunkers. You guys go get nuked. Have a nice day. Right? So they must maintain the fiction in order to gaslight their civilians. And if Trump starts talking about the root causes, that's real problematic. So again, I don't know that that's what's going to happen, but I suspect at minimum that I'm right, that something had some basics thing had to be met in order to get the meeting, and whatever it was, the Trump administration agreed to it, and since everything's root causes, I suspect that was it. They're talking about root causes, and I don't think the Russians have any delusions that all of a sudden the Americans are going to make a deal with them and keep their word, but it is very beneficial to them to get the discussion about the root causes out there. Okay, so I think that's what may happen, and if it does, it's very important. I hope they start talking about the root causes, because then it takes us closer to reality, and you can't get a deal, as we say in Zen, The tiger and the shark shall never fight, for they have no common ground, right? So the reality is that there can never be a peaceful resolution until both sides are talking about the root causes. Not that I think there can, but that's what it is. So to those who think that the Russians have played their hands brilliantly and they've suddenly lost all of their marbles and they're going to go there and they'll take anything that Trump offers them, you ain't been paying attention. And you ain't been paying attention to Russia's history. And you haven't been paying attention to Russia's military history, how they fight. You've been paying attention to Russia, what they do. Did they do that in World War II? Did they do that with Charles XII? Did they do that when? No. The Russians' focus is on winning on the ground. And they will bureaucratically string this thing out as long as they have to. But they understand all that the power, their negotiating power is also on the ground. That's why, see, that their negotiating power is on the ground. If it wasn't for the fact that the line is collapsing in eastern Ukraine, Trump wouldn't be screaming for a meeting anyway. This is kind of a panic. And let me say this about Trump. One thing you got to understand, I've come to learn, here's the thing about it. If you want to understand people, look for patterns. Look for a pattern. When you see people's patterns, me too, lots of us, most people do the same thing over and over. And oftentimes we have neurotic patterns where it doesn't work. Patterns are oftentimes, what's the term? Self-defense mechanisms, things like that. And we'll do the same thing over and over, and we'll do the same pattern over and over and over, right? And if you want to understand a person, understand their patterns. And if you want to be predicting a person, look at their patterns. They'll probably do the same thing over and over. Here's my point. People somehow think that Donald Trump has this is his long-term plan. Here's what I've realized. Donald Trump don't do long-term plans. Donald Trump, again, I am no person to diagnose a Donald Trump, but he displays narcissistic tendencies. He definitely displays narcissistic traits. No question about that. And I go back to my law enforcement days, because in law enforcement, you end up dealing with people who are narcissistic. You're arresting a lot of people, and you're arresting people, and you're dealing with crimes and criminals and interviewing people, and you end up figuring out that you're dealing with people. Some people are narcissistic, sociopathic, or psychopathic. Those kinds of things you deal with, right? And what you come to learn is it's very difficult for us who aren't members of that community to understand people who have that thought process, because it's foreign to us, right? So you think about long term. Well, Trump's not going to do this because in the long term, that's going to happen. Well, I wouldn't do it because in the long term. Well, you got to think of the long term. People who exhibit those kinds of traits, right? Here's the thing about them. They don't think about the long term. They put out fires. I've told you over and over, I've seen people do stupid things, commit crimes. And you're like, what kind of an idiot would commit a crime that it's obvious that right after they commit the crime, everybody's going to know. Nobody else could have possibly done it but them. How about this? Sometimes I like to do these. Things pop back in my mind from law enforcement. This guy worked at a Wendy's in Glen Burnie, Maryland, on Route 2, on Ritchie Highway, Glen Burnie, Maryland. And for whatever reason, he got fired, right? And he came back that evening with his brother or cousin or something like that and robbed the Wendy's that he used to work in with a gun. Comes in, puts the gun up to the people and takes the money and leaves. He used to work there. They had his social security number. They had his address. They had his phone number. They called the cops and they said, one of our former employees just robbed us. Really? Who was he? Come on over. Here's his name. When he got home, the cops were in unmarked cars waiting around the corner. He gets out of the car. They surround him, take him away. Now, one would ask oneself, wouldn't somebody think that they know who I am and they're going, no, he had a gun. He wanted money. The money was there and he could get it. So he got it. He didn't have time to think about what was going to happen in the future. Here's my point. And I've told story after story from law enforcement where you see people who don't think about the future. They just deal with right now. Hey, look at that. There's money. I want money and I can get that money. There's no, oh, if I steal this money, then somebody will know who I am. They'll come get me. They don't have that thing in their head that allows them to think about, gee, if I do this, what consequences are there going to be? You know what I mean? You'll see these type of lunatics, they're in a relationship and they'll do something to screw their relationship up completely. And you'll say to yourself, dude, didn't you realize if you did that, that your girlfriend was going to leave you? If you said that to her, if you threw that at her, or if you stole her car, her TV, guy literally broke up with his girlfriend, put him out. He comes back and steals her TV. And she knew it was him. And then wanted her back. And you're like, didn't you think that if you did something like this in your relationship, that the person would never want you back? No. At the time he wanted a TV, it was there and he could get it, right? It is, if you think about it, these kind of narcissistic people really exercise Zen at the highest level. They're present right now. Right now, they're thinking about life. They ain't thinking about what's going to happen later or the consequences of their actions. Let me get back to Trump. Let me get back to Trump. Somebody says that guy wasn't a narcissist, Garland. He was a moron. The two things are not mutually exclusive. In fact, one could argue that the words are pretty much aligned. Here's my point. I've watched Trump's patterns. And here's what I can tell you about Trump. He doesn't have a long-term outlook. Think about this. His patterns say this. Trump says, hey, if you don't do this by August 8th, I'm going to do these huge bone-crushing sanctions. And you're looking at it like, but if you do that, it's going to screw up your economy and cause problems and then our shelves. How do you do it? Trump ain't got time to think about that. Right now, the neocons are on his back. He's arguing with Lindsey Graham, this and that, bone-crushing sanctions. And you would say, well, what are you going to do when that date comes, Trump? Huh? He don't understand it. Now, August 8th comes, or the day before August 8th, they say, okay, Trump, you got to do the bone-crushing sanctions tomorrow. That's when he deals with it. Oh, crap. Yeah, that's right. Now he becomes an escape artist. That's what Trump is. That's what these people are. They consider themselves to be escape artists. That's how they live their life, as an escape artist. I will do something, and then when the time comes for me to pay the piper, I'll come up with a plan. Then who cares? So August 8th comes. All right, Trump, August 8th will be here in a couple days. And guess what? You're bone-crushing sanctions. And Trump's like, crap, what am I going to do now? He didn't think of it before it was there. Witkoff, get over there and get me a deal. I don't know what to say. Shut up. Get over there. Talk to Putin. What? And of course, Witkoff has talked to the Russians. So Witkoff can say, look, they want to talk about the root causes. Well, for God's sake, then tell them you'll talk about the root causes. We'll talk about the root cause. We'll talk about anything. You got to get me out of this. I can't do this on the 8th. Okay. Putin go. They go over there. They get a deal. And they say, Russians, will talk about the root causes. And the Russians say, well, we're men of our words. We told you that if you agreed to talk about the root causes, that we would meet with Trump. So we'll meet. And, let's run through. So they work out the places, and Alaska is it. And of course, as you probably know, the Russians will make a deal, an agreement, and say, we got to have our security forces there, immediately to work on all of this and ensure security. And we need the following things. And so they're doing their thing to ensure security. Everybody's doing what they need to do. And now they got the meeting. But it wasn't a long-term plan by Trump. It was putting out a fire. This is the problem I have right now. How am I going to deal with it? I'm an escape artist. I'm cornered. And when an escape artist is cornered, they escape from the corner, and then they'll deal with that. What Trump is going to talk about and what deal he's going to offer and this and that, he has no clue. He don't know. He doesn't know. And the Russians understand it. And they understand that he doesn't have the authority to do what he's pretending he has the authority to do anyway. That he is not in charge. Putin said it long ago. He says, it doesn't matter whoever the president is. The guys with the dark suits and the briefcases come in and tell him how it's going to be. Putin said this years ago. So he understands that Trump ain't in charge. And so do I. And I think a lot of people in the chat understand that same thing, right? So I think what we're looking at is, for the Russians, They got nothing to lose. They have nothing to lose. They're winning on the battlefield. We got nothing to lose. They want to talk about the root causes. If they can get a conversation about the root causes, why wouldn't they take that? They get a nice PR win. Everybody's running around. The Russians are crazy and Putin's a crazy man all over the U.S. and all over the Europe. And Vladimir Putin gets to come in and say, I'm willing to be reasonable. I'm not going to talk. Now, why are you calling me a crazy man? And people get to see that, well, what are they talking about? He's just the president of Russia. Why is everybody calling him a crazy man? He's talking like any other president of anybody. So my point is, I can see everywhere it benefits the Russians. That's it. And I think the Russians are happy with Alaska as a very remote location. The Brits ain't there, and the Brits can't sneak her in, and Zelensky can't backdoor like he usually does at the UAE and show up at the last minute and try to get in and all of that stuff. Nobody gets there. They're going to be very isolated. I think the Russians like the isolation of it, and it makes sense. So that's what we're looking at. What's going to come of this? I don't think the Russians expect anything to come of it other than the wins that they put it to you like this. They get a certain amount of wins simply by having the meeting. So I think the meeting is a win for the Russians. I also think, let's not forget, you got the whole BRICS thing, and the Russians are constantly, saying to their BRICS partners, look, we're going to do everything we can to keep peace. So I think that it benefits them to say to their BRICS partners, hey, look what we're doing. We're doing everything we can to have peace. So it helps. They need that. The Russians are always cognizant of that. I think that they're marking time while they win, and they know it. So that benefits them. So there's a lot of things. This benefits the Russians a lot. Trump, it kind of gets him out of a corner that he's an escape artist. He's always getting out of corners. And I think that's that. Now, I think as far as I can see, I think that's the long and short of that. Let's see what happens. Let's watch it. Let's not get too carried away and pretend that we can predict any outcomes. If you understand the Russians and how they do diplomacy, it's long and slow. So I would imagine the Russians to come out of this and say, look, next meeting, Trump comes to Russia. Another thing I'm watching, and that's very important, and that is the early September meeting with Xi Jinping. Now, I think that the fact that Putin and Xi are meeting in September 3rd makes it more likely and wiser that the Russians would accept this meeting with Trump. Here's what I mean. Clearly, the Russians and the Chinese are working together, right? And as has been reported, after President Putin's last call with Trump, he immediately called his buddy in China and updated him on the conversation, right? Well, they get ready to have a meeting. I don't think he just updated him on a conversation. I think they're strategizing. So I think it's wise. I think prior to the meeting, and let me say this, it could even be very much related to the meeting between Xi Jinping and Putin, right? In September. It's quite possible that Xi and Putin have been talking. Well, that's not just reported, and that perhaps Putin is going to run some things by Trump and say, look, I'm meeting with Xi Jinping in September, and this is what we're talking about. And this is some questions we have, and these are some things, you know what I mean? And immediately afterwards, he's going back to Xi, that there is some triangulation there, that because they are partners. The China doesn't do allies, but they do partners. As I found out, we're doing some interviews on CGT, and don't say allies with China. As soon as you say, well, you're allies, we don't do allies. We do partners, right? I do think that there could be some announcements coming out of the meeting in September. And I think that it is actually wise for Putin to meet Trump first and um, maybe talk, get a feel for him, run some things by him, have some things that he can report back that they can discuss in that meeting. So I think that's important. I think that's part of what this is about. But we will see. We will see. Okay, let's do the one last thing here that before I go, I want to touch base on the other issue. A couple of things. Let's put a couple of things together. I think that the U.S. empire. Look, the old thing is, you're doubling down on stupid, right? The U.S. empire is overstretched militarily, overstretched from an intelligence perspective, overstretched economically. So why would you think that they wouldn't do something really, really stupid again? Two things I'll put together for you. Number one, think about these. It's blatantly obvious where they're going with this. Number one, Rubio and his arch Cuban right wing Caribbean, Central American, South American conservative neocons, right? Number one, just put these two things together and say how obvious it is. We want a $50 million. We've got a $50 million reward for the arrest of Nicolas Maduro, the president of Venezuela, because he's a narco leader, drug gang running guy. Piece of evidence one. Piece of evidence two. Donald Trump is preparing for military actions against the drug cartels. He didn't say where. Put those two together. You're going to label Nicolas Maduro a drug cartel leader, and then immediately after, you're going to announce that you're putting together military groups for military actions against the drug cartel. Now, add this. After his first term, it was reported that Trump said, well, why didn't we just go to war with Venezuela? They got oil and they're close by and we could take their oil, as a criminal thug would want to do. Hey, what'd I say? There's oil. It's right there. We can get it. Let's take it. Right? So what does that tell me? Now, let me add this. The U.S. wants to double down on hegemony in the region. Well, if they want to take Canada and they want the Panama Canal and Greenland, what do you think that means about Central and South America, right? So what you're going to see is this: an attempt to dominate militarily, economically, but militarily, maybe go after Cuba, Nicaragua, and where's all that oil again? Venezuela. Nicolas Maduro is a drug cartel leader. We're putting together a military group to go after the drug cartels. Put those two things together, it's obvious. Now, who else do they hate? Claudia Sheinbaum. She's a leftist kind of leader in Mexico. They're not too thrilled with her, are they? They're not too thrilled with some of the things that Mexico's been doing the last few years. Mexico has said they want to be a part of BRICS. Mexico has gone in a different direction than the United States wants them to go in. They're doing deals with China and they're friends with Russia and all that kind of stuff, right? So I think before even the speculation part, the fact that the U.S. says Nicolas Maduro is a drug leader, cartel leader, and then immediately after announces, oh, by the way, we're going after drug cartels, that tells you that their plans are military action against Venezuela. Now, from a guy who's been to Venezuela, traveled around Venezuela, that ain't wise. One of the things that the revolutionary government of Venezuela done, and here's what's interesting. The U.S., you got a lot of countries. We don't want you to have weapons. We got to take the people's weapons. No weapons for the people. Ain't the way it is in Venezuela. They arm everybody. They arm their people. Most people in Venezuela, a lot of them, but most of them are members of the government militia. In other words, they're a member of the army. Been there. They wear a tan suit. That means you're a member of the militia. But that's like most of the country. Millions, 30 million people. A lot of them are members of the militia. and they're armed, and the government has armed them so that if they're attacked by the US or anybody else, they can fight millions of people armed. Anything that moves, it looks American, or whoever's attacking them, shoot at it, right? Let's not forget what happened in the infamous Bay of Piglets, right? The John Bolton plan to overthrow Venezuela, where they had like somewhere between 60 and 120, I don't know the exact number, of these mercenaries. And their brilliant plan was to come ashore on boats in Venezuela, to get off the boats and to, quote, make their way to the presidential palace and kidnap or kill Maduro. They didn't even make it ashore. They're heading ashore, and a bunch of fishermen, who are, of course, members of the militia, saw them. Hey, wait a minute. Those guys look like they got guns. They took out their guns. They got in a gunfight with them. They killed most of them. They captured a few, like 19 maybe. I think they killed a bunch and they captured 19 or 20, something like that. And they took them in. In other words, they didn't even make it past the fishermen. Why? Because that's Venezuela. The people are armed by the government, well armed. You go to Venezuela, I remember I was at a polling place and I realized there was a different mentality there. I remember I was at a polling place on election day, and there was these soldiers around, and they were armed, and they had jeeps, and they were soldiers all around. And I was kind of scared. And I said, aren't the people afraid with soldiers everywhere? And what they said was, no, they're here to protect us. And it's understanding that the people there, at least the majority of the people there, see the government as their ally. They see the government as the government who's going to protect them from, and they use the word of neoliberalism, who's going to protect them from the West, who's going to protect them from neoliberal capitalism. They'll say, we'll fight for our revolution. Bottom line is this. If you go there, the people are going to, they're going to fight on behalf of the government, and they're armed. The people are armed and will fight against you on behalf of the government. It ain't wise to go start a war in Venezuela. You ain't seen a war like you'd see in Venezuela. So bottom line is, but I do believe that Trump and the neocons are now planning for military actions in the region. I think that we're going after the they ain't going after no drug cartels. Come on. The CIA is a drug cartel. I mean, look it up. Look up Air America, CIA bringing cocaine into it. Look up the Golden Triangle during Vietnam, the CIA bringing in heroin from Southeast Asia. Look up Afghanistan, the CIA bringing in moving heroin from Afghanistan. Look up El Chapo, the DEA making an agreement with El Chapo that he could transport drugs into the United States, specifically Chicago, but in other places, in return for information about other cartels. So you think they're worried about drug cartels? They're a big drug cartel. But my point is, that's an excuse for political actions. That's an excuse for political regime change actions. So bottom line, the whole thing, the president of peace, and Trump wants peace, and he's going to do this and that. He's just another neoliberal, conservative warmonger. And he's ducking and dodging, and he's backed into a corner with Ukraine, and he's trying to figure a way to use his escape artist tactics to get out of it. And there ain't no way out of this one. Defeat. That's the way out. That's the way out. And eventually, we're going to get to a place, quite simple, where it's clear and obvious that the West is suffering a catastrophic defeat at the hands of Russia, that NATO is suffering a catastrophic defeat at the hands of Russia. And that could be weeks, if not months away. That's where we are. And then what are they going to do? They don't have the military capacity now to intervene. They've thrown all of their weapons either in Israel or in Ukraine, and they've all been blown to smithereens or used up. So they don't have, the only thing they could do is take a suicide pill. Well, we're going to throw a nuke at Russia, and then they're going to nuke us and we'll all die. There we go. That's their only option. They don't have a military option, really. They're not in a position to fight. They're not in a position to economically do anything. They've played every hand they have. So, I think that what we're looking at, part of what we're looking at now is this. I'll end with this. This whole, what is it? What do they call them? bone crushing sanctions, and everybody knows that if tariffs or whatever, that this stuff would destroy the U.S. What we're looking at is, and here's the difference between, say, a Trump and a Biden neocons, a Blinken neocons. In Blinken's book, Ally versus Ally, one of the things that he discussed was taking action against Russia, even though it would have significant negative effects on the business community and, of course, the people in both Europe and the U.S. Basically, Blinken saying that him and his neocon faction says we're only concerned about geopolitical advantage, and we don't care if it crushes the economy of the working class. We'll do whatever we need to do. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you the Nord Stream attack, right? Who cares? Great, whatever. We want geopolitical advantages. Okay. And that is the difference. Now, Trump may bungle and stumble into using his boneheaded economic beliefs and tariffs and stuff into political disaster. Bottom line was the U.S. is heading there one way or the other. Okay, one way or the other, the U.S. is heading to economic disaster. So they're throwing some Hail Marys that aren't going to do any good anyway. But Trump is less likely to say, let's take this action for geostrategic advantage, even though we know very quickly it's going to destroy the economy. He's a neocon. But the Blinken people and the Bolton and the Lindsey Grahams will say, let's take this, but it's going to destroy our economy. Who cares? We gotta stop. We gotta stop Putin because we gotta kick Putin's ass because he and Modi. We gotta crush China's account. That's gonna. He won't even. And if you say to Graham and those people, but it's going to destroy the U.S. economy and the people in the U.S. will be, crushed economically. He'll say, "Huh? I don't understand the question. What are you talking about here? Let's get back to destroying Putin and bone crushing sanctions. And boy, we're going to let Putin. That's all. They don't care. Give a crap about you, Trump." And this is not positive or negative about Trump. Trump is that there are factions of the ruling elite that are less likely to do that, and factions that are more likely to do that. The Lindsey Graham is a faction that's more likely to do that. Trump is part of the faction that's less likely to do that. That's all it is. It's warmongers, nevertheless, a different brand of warmongers, a different strain of warmongers, but warmongers, nevertheless. Some a little more reckless than others. That's all. In some areas, some are more reckless. I think I'd say Lindsey Graham is a more economically reckless. Little. There are people that'll take bigger chances and stick their neck out further. And Trump ain't one to stick his neck out as far as a Lindsey Graham. That's what I would say. So he don't want to. And here's the other part of it. For Lindsey Graham, it's easy, and his group. You know why? And I think Trump knows this. If they take an action, bone-crushing sanctions, and a month later our economy just bottoms out, collapses, they know Trump will be blamed for it. And at that point, they'll leave Trump on an island. Hey, what do you think, Lindsey Graham, about that decision that was made? Well, I wouldn't have made that decision to crush Putin. If it was me, I think Trump made a mistake. Perhaps we need to get rid of him and bring somebody in here that's going to do a job. They'll leave him on an island and stick a knife right in his back. That's the truth. If in fact, what do they have? They got nothing to lose. They take this action. It doesn't work. It crushes the economy. They then turn on Trump and say, I wouldn't have did it if I was him. What a terrible thing. What a stupid thing. So that's where we are. That's my thing. That's my video for today. That's the way I see things. Speculation. People will be like, you're wrong, Garland. I may be. This is speculation. I'm just a schmuck here. I'm just a schmuck. All right. Let's see. We're going to look and see if we got any super chats. And if we do, I will answer them. Let me see something. Oh, there's Myra Page. Hi, Myra. Myra is here all the time. We really appreciate Myra. Let's see. Chicken Patty, of course. I'm still looking, guys and girls. Okay, let's go. What the heck that is? Vincent Vega, maybe? Thanks for all you do, Garland. Keep up the good work. Thank you, Vincent Vega. I hope I'm doing that. I got that. I've interpreted that right. Let's see. Any more super chats? We're going to answer the super chats if there are any. We're looking. So far, it's it with Vincent Vega. I thought I might have seen another super chat. Wow, there's a lot of people on here. I'm still there. Skeptical jerk. And there's who else we got? A random jack. Wow, a lot of the regulars. Again. Well, we may almost be out. Here's one. And that is, oh, a super sticker from Ivan B. Yeah, Ivan B's a regular also. All right. I think that's it. All right. Thanks a lot, everybody. Look, I kind of enjoyed doing this. And I enjoy kind of hanging out with everybody and having these kind of talks. And as I've said, for the most part, these are streams of consciousness. I have a kind of an idea what I'm going to say when I get started, and then I just get in and see what comes out. So let's see. By the way, don't everybody please remember, follow me on Rockfin and Rumble and Telegram and all Facebook and Instagram, all that kind of stuff. If you can afford it, buy me a coffee, Cash App, Patreon, PayPal. There's lots of ways to keep the channel going. That's highly appreciated. Follow me over there on Substack. There's my P.O. Box, P.O. Box 32, Glen Burnie, Maryland, 21061, right there at the bottom. People send all kinds of stuff. People send books. People send just cards to say hello, letters, the things they were thinking about, all kinds of long stuff. Some people send donations. So whatever, there's my P.O. Box. Appreciate it, everybody. Have a wonderful day. Share this on all your social media platforms and think about this stuff. And have a great day. I'm out.